The threats that I got while working on this beat are so crazy. Like I was taking my son to the batting cage and he's in the back seat. I got him a Slurpee or whatever. And I get a call from the FBI saying, "Hey, we have somebody who wants to assassinate you." And I can't really ask him I can't ask the agent any questions because my son is right there and I don't want to disturb this 8-year-old boy who's very impressionable.
Thanks for checking out Hate Comes to Main Street as I continue to try to bring you important and relevant conversations. If you like what you're seeing, please hit subscribe. My guest today is Michael Edison Hayden. He's a veteran investigative reporter and an expert on far right extremism. He worked at the Southern Poverty Law Center for 5 years. He's the author of a new book, Strange People on the Hill: How Extremism Tore Apart a Small American Town. And Mike, thanks for joining me. This book is a fascinating read. I just kept turning page after page after page, and I really admire your work. So it's good to have this conversation with you.
Thanks so much, Phil. It's great to be here. Great to meet you on video, even though we haven't met in person yet.
And we're going to go into the book more in a little bit, but first, you worked at the Southern Poverty Law Center from 2018 to 2023, if I have that right. You were an investigative reporter, you were a spokesperson. Of course, now the group is under attack from the Trump administration, essentially accused of manufacturing racism for fundraising purposes. Part of that conspiracy theory is now emerging, accusing the SPLC of actually staging the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And that was in 2017. This is what President Trump just told 60 Minutes.
It shows you that, like Charlottesville was all funded by the Southern Law. That was a Southern Law deal, too. And it was done to make me look bad, and it turned out to be a total fake. It basically was a rigged election. This was a part of the rigging of the election.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly offensive, for one thing. I mean, I'm trying to pull SPLC out of it for a moment and just to try to think about, what this actually means to the city of Charlottesville. I mean, everybody who is there knows exactly what happened. It wasn't one person orchestrating a mob to say "Hey, you need to all come out and do this for fundraising purposes." They first descended on the city in mid-May of 2017. A lot of people forget that. And that was, a rally to try to raise attention to the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue that was in Charlottesville. So that's the first point. It was in May of 2017. I didn't hear anything from Trump or anything from this indictment or anything like that about that date. After that date, which they deemed to be successful, which it was because there wasn't really enough counter protests. Maybe they didn't have time, whatever it was, I can't recall at the time, but they were able to march without any kind of interruption. They decided, hey, let's build on this and make it even bigger. So they were getting really high on their own supply, and just doing events that were building up to what would happen in August of 2017. In that run-up, you had a whole bunch of different figures, including Jason Kessler, who secured the permit. You had Richard Spencer, who was the biggest kind of extremist celebrity at that time. He was promoting it on his social channels. You had, leaders of groups like League of the South and Identity Europa. They were recruiting their members to go to this Traditionalist Worker Party. Some of these groups are not even in action anymore, but at the time were had a pretty decent following. They could get hundreds of people down there. So these things were happening and they were building up more and more steam towards August. All of that has been recorded. It's all in Discord logs that were preserved by Unicorn Riot. There are so many archived tweets, so many archived blog posts. Everybody knows how many people were involved. I didn't even mention the Right Stuff Network, which Mike Penovich operated. He brought a lot of people there by promoting it on that podcast, et cetera. So we know exactly who did this down in Charlottesville. It's a huge offense to the people there. who are still emotionally recovering from what happened.
And what we learned from the civil trial, especially that came out of Unite the Right, was that these groups went there with the specific intention of provoking violence. And I read the Circuit Court of Appeals opinion in that case. They mentioned it was like a 4-week trial, 900 exhibits, 35 witnesses, and so it was very clear these groups were there to provoke violence. This was not a hate that needed to be manufactured.
Yeah. I think people may have memory hold this, but there were a whole bunch of memes that circulated on the right at that time about running over protesters. In 2016 or so, there were a lot of instances in which there were racial justice protests and people would go in the street and block cars, to draw attention to to what had happened, a police shooting somewhere. It would happen all over the country, basically. And the response to that became some people sharing memes that sort of, you know, express excitement for running over such people, right? And no SPLC, to bring this back to the story, no SPLC paid informant was pumping those type of memes or created those memes in the first place. They had existed for years before someone finally acted on it in the way that they did. And that's just like one of many, many examples like that. As for whatever leadership chat, we need more information about that. They're claiming that there was an SPLC and paid informant in some sort of leadership chat. Some of these chats were pretty accessible. Sometimes they would involve just a link posted somewhere. So we don't know if this is just some random guy who was feeding information to the SPLC and getting money for it, and just running that information back, who happened to be lurking in the background. We don't know anything about this, but one thing I do know is that in the entire time I worked at the SPLC, and I wrote so many stories about these particular guys, is nobody was ever like, wait a second, this is a conflict of interest, you can't write about this person, right? They are on our payroll. That never came up once. Not only that, I never even heard of the idea of paid informants. I think the most important thing that your listeners and viewers need to register is that I was a spokesperson. I served as a spokesperson from 2018 to 2023, and never once heard of this program. I never heard of it my entire time there. No one ever mentioned it to me. I never had to speak about it. And you could say like, well, maybe they were trying to cover it up or something like that. Okay, but I mean, if when you're talking about the ins and outs of a major organization, you do get background information about stuff you don't talk about, right? At some point. I mean, I literally never even heard of this program.
Yeah, and as I have gone into many, many times, you read the one paragraph in the indictment about Unite the Right, and it doesn't say this person, this informant, was a leader. It only says this informant somehow made his way into the leadership chat.
Right.
It
Yes.
doesn't say that Southern Poverty Law Center paid for transportation. It only says that this informant somehow was assigned to arrange transportation for, quote, several people. That's far from this vast conspiracy that the president and other MAGA figures are imagining.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I said, in some of these chats, they were literally posting the link onto 4chan or what was then 8chan, Infinity Chan. And someone would pick it. You could just pick it up. They were trying to get people into these chats. So it was, so I don't know the exact security around this particular chat. I know there were more, uh, closely guarded rooms, like there's like a Daily Stormers writers room and things like that were more difficult to access. But in general, these are people who like energy. They like the idea of a raucous time online. They like the idea of a big mob coming in to Charlottesville, create havoc. They love that type of thing. So they would not exactly saying like, "Hey, hold on, we're the generals. We have to make sure nobody is able to access this." It was, I mean, this is like kindergarten. Like they're behaving like completely tribal kindergartners. So they're just ready to they're ready to admit anybody into these rooms who's got an idea about how they can raise hell in Charlottesville.
And I think it's important to note that your book, Strange People on the Hill, uh, is not a defense of the Southern Poverty Law Center. In fact, you describe it as being extraordinarily dysfunctional.
Oh,
Am I reading
that's
that correctly?
well. I mean, dysfunctional. Yes, I mean it was. You know, I think the journey that the reader will go on, the SPLC part of it is not the main. It's not the main through line of the story, but it is you can't really understand what happened to me, at least in Berkeley Springs, without understanding it. But the SPLC, it captures the from 2020, the beginning of 2020 to right at the end of the 2024 election. So basically a 5-year period. Um, and this is really the end of the SPLC being aggressive with hate groups. It's really the end of that moment. They, I mean, when the books started, we're coming off of things like my reporting on Stephen Miller's previously private emails and a bunch of other stories that put SPLC directly in contact with the Trump world. And they had a leadership that was in place around 2020 that started to really pull back from that. And we see a lot of pressure against a lot of pressure against our work, just almost a profound fear of risk in the Trump era. And to your thing of dysfunction, the way they responded to that was really union breaking tactics, among other things. So yeah, I have a lot of criticism of the SPLC, and the book is not so much about what my work with the SPLC then, but what all of us, including probably some people in your viewership, go through in trying to draw attention to hate, extremism, neo-fascism. It is a really difficult thing, and the institutions are not necessarily helping at this point.
And I think that's an important point to make because those of us who do this work know it is extraordinarily difficult. There are just all sorts of challenges we face personally with, security, family threats. Uh, and so the notion that you would be part of an organization that's trying to gin up hate once you know this, it seems quite preposterous. Can you speak to the difficulties? And you do speak to this, quite bluntly in your book, but give viewers a sense of just how difficult this work is.
Well, I mean, I spent 3 weeks from the end of December of 2023 to the beginnings of first couple weeks of January in a psychiatric facility. And it was not, I mean, some of it had to do with the way my tenure at SPLC ended, which was really like, again, lots of union breaking tactics, just adding stress onto the main point, an already stressful job. And I had, the threats that I got while working on this beat are so crazy. Like I would get I was taking my son to the batting cage and he's in the back seat. I got him a Slurpee or whatever. And I get a call from the FBI saying, "Hey, we have somebody who wants to assassinate you." And I can't really ask him I can't ask the agent any questions because my son is right there and I don't want to disturb this 8-year-old boy,
Right.
who's very impressionable. I mean, that's just one of many examples, but I mean, I had to, even before I was with the SPLC, I was working at Newsweek covering this beat, and I had police reports in Queens, where I lived, Long Island, where my parents lived, and then I had one in Lower Manhattan, where the Newsweek offices were. That's a lot, and they were all legitimate police reports. And the reason to do those is to keep a record, so just in case anyone actually tries it. But I would get all these kind of messages like, "Tell your colleagues not to go in tomorrow," and these
Wow.
are is really yeah. I mean, and not only that, VDR, who is the extremist group who is at the center of the action in Strange People on the Hill, they published photographs of my sister. They published photographs of my parents. They published they linked directly to my sister's Instagram, and including a photo that had me with my son. This is there's a lot of stuff to deal with. So that's a long way into saying that once you are in that world and you're dealing with these additional pressures become almost too much to bear. In my case, those pressures came from the SPLC and the way they treated our union and me. But also when you have people trying to gaslight the public and say like, oh, you caused this hate in the first place, that has a profound effect on people. And I feel really, really bad for the workers who are there, who I know, even if I have my disagreements with SPLC's leadership, the workers I know have their heart absolutely in the right place and are great people. Some of them are extremely talented, and this is terrible for them. This must be really, really difficult going to work every day.
Yeah, and I have one more question before we actually get into your book. But you mentioned something that I think is important, is to understand why the Trump administration may be going after the Southern Poverty Law Center. You published a heck of a piece into Stephen Miller's emails. Tell people essentially what that was about, and do you think that could factor into what's happening now?
Well, I haven't actually got to, on my book tour, haven't really got a chance to mention this yet, and partly because I think I had forgotten it until this second. But the RNC in 2020, I know this is a long time ago, so everybody, everything in the old days, something would happen 6 years ago and you'd remember it and you'd be like, oh yeah, but now it's like, a year's happen in a day. But, in 2020, back then, I remember Trump had like a big fireworks thing. And if I recall correctly, it is something like this. They didn't really propose anything for Trump's second term. The main thing was like, we'll do whatever Trump wants, basically. It was like, there was like, Trump is good. And they had one like unified statement condemning the Southern Poverty Law Center as like not a reputable source. And I remember laughing about that because it was, I guess, 8 to 10 months, somewhere in that range. I can't do the math immediately. Maybe 10 months. Yeah, probably 10 months after I had published the article into his emails.
And this article was about his running in white nationalist circles.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Well, basically what he was doing is even more insidious and clever than that. Him running in white nationalist circles is true to the extent that Stephen Miller invited Peter Brimlow, who is the extremist at the center of Strange People on the Hill, invited Peter Brimlow down to Duke to speak in 2007. So that's the extent to which he would, associate him publicly that we know. But he was sending links to Breitbart to try to change the conversation on conservative media to something that was more nativist. You could argue more white supremacist. So he would reference VDR, which is an SPLC designated white nationalist group, and American Renaissance, an SPLC designated white nationalist group, and say like, hey, you should do an article based on this article, right? To Breitbart News. In an attempt to kind of get Trump's base hooked on this more explicitly racist stuff. Like, let's get out of the no tax, lay off my guns rhetoric, and let's start focusing on guys named Ramirez, right? So everything would be like people with Hispanic last names and, crime stories, and in some cases, articles directly from white nationalist websites. So it's very insidious. Like he was trying to change the base of the Republican Party to something that was more amenable to what he was doing. So yeah, they actually, did a full statement condemning the SPLC like 10 months after that, like to pull the entire Republican Party. So it means it was obvious that the SPLC would be in the sights of this administration when they came back. They made that statement right before we last saw them in power, right?
Right.
Biden ultimately won. Trump doesn't believe that, but it is as true as anything I know in politics. And and then they come back into power, and no surprise, the same party that was condemning the SPLC was going to go after them. Of course, the SPLC's response to this at the start of Trump's election was to really pull back, and we did not see them do almost anything. They're very little. They publish very little. They've done very few controversial things. They haven't made the press very much since Trump won. That's not to say that some people haven't done good work that has gone unnoticed. That's true. But in reality, they really haven't done much to draw attention. And I think that was a deliberate strategy by the SPLC because they knew that they were a target. And to that, I say, look where that got you. They were going to come for the SPLC one way or another.
Now, your book, Strange People on the Hill, the subtitle is How Extremism Tore Apart a Small American Town, which is very appropriate for my website, Hate Comes to Main Street, because, I saw how hate affected a small community on a smaller scale. But we're talking about Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. What happened in Berkeley Springs?
Yeah. The first thing I would say, and I think people will get this when they read the book, is that I love Berkeley Springs. I just think it is the most beautiful place, and I hope people go visit it. The book, I've gotten so much great feedback on the book, and so many people love it. The only negative feedback I have received from people were people who read the subtitle and were like, "Oh, I thought this was going to be only about the town." It is about everybody and what everyone kind of goes through, I think, in this particular climate right now. The town itself is a beautiful tourist town. It's gorgeous, and people come from elsewhere. So by that I mean there are some people who live in Baltimore, and they come in on the weekends. They come from DC, they come from Philly, they come from all over in order to have a weekend where they go hiking and they do these things or whatever for a place in Morgan County, West Virginia. And this is very important. It has a disproportionate number of gay people either living there or visiting, right? There's this stereotype of West Virginia being this kind of place that is just like, we're just Appalachian, like this, that, the other thing. These are a lot of transplants who live in Berkeley Springs. So that's important. The surrounding area is, I would say, about 75-80% pro-Trump. Like that's the way they voted. About 90% white. There's only 17,000 people in Morgan County. The jewel of the entire county and area is this beautiful castle that is perched on a hill. That town that I mentioned that relies on visitors from liberal cities is underneath. So this SPLC designated white nationalist group, VDARE, buys this beautiful castle, which they found on Zillow of all places, for $1.4 million. This is something that should really, it's a 19th century castle, beautiful sandstone castle. And it really should be a national park of some kind. It's amazing that it was even available on Zillow. It's kind of crazy to think about. And they're like, they see it and they're like, well, we won't get canceled here. We won't have Antifa try to break down our doors. We can get our people to meet in private and we're going to buy it. And then look at the surrounding town. It's overwhelmingly white and pro-Trump. So they're going to love us. But the reality is that the town was very different from what they imagined. And there are people in red states throughout the country who have different values than this SPLC designated white nationalist group. Just in the same way that New York is diverse enough to produce Rudy Giuliani and Trump, red states also produce people who believe in equality, who have values, who have values of of being inclusive, etc. And what happens when they buy the castle is that the town starts to rebel against them and try to figure out a way to push back. They're worried about tourism dollars. That's a big factor because they're heavily reliant on that. Berkeley Springs doesn't really have any kind of way to make money beyond tourism at this point. I mean, there are a few industries that are there, but that is the main one. And that's the conflict that follows, ropes me into it, and I don't know if we go.
And V. Dare, we should note, is named after Virginia Dare, the first
Yes.
white child that was born on the what is now in the United States. Part of the story is V. Dare's efforts to kind of bridge this world of white nationalism with mainstream politics. What happened with VDARE? What does that say about our current climate?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, Phil. So VDARE has very little use in 2026. And I say that because their work is kind of already done. So in many ways, you could even argue that SPLC is not well fitted for the current climate as well. So this is a lot of institutions in their, having their kind of twilight moment in this book when they buy the castle and they're facing like mass cancellation. This is at the same time we are learning as a public the influence they had on Stephen Miller, the influence they had on our immigration policies under Trump, the influence they had in spreading the so-called great replacement narrative, right? Which is this idea that elites have orchestrated the country in such a way to bring in non-white immigrants and destroy the white population on purpose. Right? This is becoming a bigger and bigger narrative on the right. VDARE has been responsible for promoting all these ideas. They have been laying the groundwork for this moment going back to the 90s, right? So that's where they have been. That's where they were going all through during the George W. Bush years, when George Bush was out on the campaign trail speaking in Spanish to people to try to bring in voters. They were out there saying, stop this, max out the white vote. You need to appeal this nativist appeal. They've been petitioning, trying to get people to pay attention to it for so long. So the question is, where are they now? What does it mean? What it means is that, like, in 2024, when at another RNC, everybody is holding up these signs that say mass deportations now. You have a woman that I saw on TV. I stayed offline all of 2024 because I was recovering from that time I mentioned the psychiatric hospital, as well as writing my book. So I didn't really get online very much. I turned on the TV, and I remember just with that lack of being online, brain being alive and sensitive in a different way from not being bombarded with stuff. Seeing a woman in a wheelchair holding up old woman in a wheelchair holding up a sign that says mass deportations now, and just being like, oh my God, right? That was VDARE's influence on America. They were able to change the Republican message so profoundly that they went from let's speak Spanish to try to recruit people to being like, let's punish anybody who's got a Hispanic last name. And that's not their actual policy, to be clear, just to qualify, but they essentially wanted mass deportations. They want end to all, they want ends to legal immigration, things like that.
Yeah, it's funny. I had forgotten about that period where you had Republican politicians speaking Spanish to try
Yes.
to get that vote.
Well, that's the easiest way to understand the impact that their activism had. They were very effective. They were like, Peter Brimlow is very effective. I think he has, by his own ambitions, has been very successful. And I think that he feels persecuted now as his group is falling apart. But that the book follows that. I think what the book really follows is like you have this kind of spy versus spy type thing going on in the book, of which I'm a part, which is the SPLC and VDR, and they're kind of against this. And then by the time we get to the 2024 election, everything is kind of wiped in a way. It's almost like now, now things have given way due in part to so much of the tech money that was infused into Trump's campaign and many other things, and the collapse of the Biden campaign and stuff like that. But basically, like the thing that we were warning about all through happened in 2024 when Trump was reelected, and everything that Vidir tried to do kind of succeeded. But both of those two competing groups kind of imploded in many ways. At the end of that battle.
Yeah, and it's such a page turner. We're not even really we're barely touching the surface of what's in this book. So I think you really have to read it to appreciate it. Last question: what do you hope people take away from this book? What do you hope people learn from Berkeley Springs?
Well, um, the first thing is, I think, a lot of people have come to me and said this is like, it'd be like, oh my God, this is devastating. And like, it's like, I'm so like because the material, I think sometimes when people are reading about hate and they're reading about the impact of fascism on the human psyche, like they think dark, disturbing, you know, I think the responses I've gotten that I like the best for people who understand that some of it is funny. And that's like a weird way to put it, is if there is hope in the book, it comes from the fact that I think that some of the people that I care about that also report on the same material, that we do find room to laugh at some of the darkness that we're dealing with. That's one thing. The other thing is that everybody in this book has a really bad time. And I'll bookend that with why that's, that sounds like a warning, but I mean it as as a very important thread to focus on, because Peter Brimlow and Lydia Brimlow, I mean, really face it is the death throes of their organization are covered here in some ways, even though they're happen to be raising hell in this local community just by being there. The neighbors who go at each other have issues with one another. Um, they're crying, they're going through things. I'm going through things. Everybody I know is going through, the country is going through things. And what I would say is, the old commercial they used to have to warn kids not to use drugs. This is your brain on drugs. This is our brains on fascism. This is what happens when this friend enemy distinction gets pushed by elites, and they are elites, onto our culture, onto our everyday life. We are carrying around, all of us, even if we're not that engaged in the fight so as to be working for the SPLC or whatever it might be. We are ultimately carrying around this burden all the time of just, some of my neighbors may turn on me if this culture war becomes hot and stuff like that. It's a warning, I think, that we need to soften this culture. We need a sharp, also soften the culture, warm the culture, start focusing on humanity and spirituality and those important things that we have cared about in the past, I think, at times, and also to just sharpen our response to fascism. When people try to say that we need to make enemies of our neighbors simply to help them get power, we have to say no to it.
The book is Strange People on the Hill: How Extremism Tore Apart a Small American Town. Mike, it's an incredible work. I appreciate this incredible conversation, and I look forward to hopefully others carrying on this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. My friends and I who report on this stuff, we think of you as a legend. So it was an honor to be here talking to you.
Yeah. Be well.
Take care.